What is going on, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of Strength Coach Rants. I'm your host, Connor Lyons, and today we're going to be talking about forearm training.
It's all my head, now stuck in the void again.
Forearm training tends to be like a pretty big topic when it comes to sports performance, strength and conditioning for sport. And a lot of it has to do with what people have been taught, right? So the old baseball, the clubhouses had the little rice bucket with the weight in it, and you'd do figure eights, and you had the little pipe roller things where you'd roll up a PVC pipe with like 5 or 10 pounds on it, and then you'd roll it back down and all that. We're going to talk about today why all that's completely unnecessary. I know I'm kind of spitting in the face of what a lot of coaches say when I say this, but your time is better off spent doing other things. We're going to talk about why today. So I can remember listening to what's his name? Joe DeFranco. I almost said Joe Rogan. Joe DeFranco's old podcast. He may still have it. I'm just not listening to as many podcasts. They don't have quite the time. But he had an entire episode on forearm training and how important forearm training was for his various athletes. He even had a kid that went off and just wasn't able to afford to train with him for a little bit. And he's like, hey, just do these for your forearms while you're gone. And when the kid came back, he was stronger in legitimately everything. Now, that's an anecdotal case, but it kind of stuck to him. It stuck in his head, at least, that forearm training is very important. I can see why he might think that, but the reality of it is that it's totally and completely and utterly unnecessary, and we need to stop wasting our time with it. So I've worked at facilities where forearm training was a big thing, especially for receivers and even DBs. Athletes would spend time on upper body days for 15, 20 minutes doing forearm circuits after we got done lifting. And it just seems like such an absolute waste of time. And I'm going to lay out my case kind of right now for that. So for starters, the vast majority of these forearm training modalities are like endurance modalities, right? So you're not holding on to something super incredibly heavy for a really long time. You're moving like, I don't know, for upwards of 45 to 60 seconds with like 5 to 10 pounds. Now, in what other aspect of our training would we ever consider that to be quote unquote strength training and not just endurance training, right? It's very submax. If you are somebody who can deadlift 400 plus pounds and you're doing the little pipe roll thing with the string on it, with the weight on it, with like 5 pounds, tell me how that's making you any better. It's not. It's allowing you to increase your ability to perform at a very mediocre pace for a really long time. And again, we talked about this on this podcast, this channel before. That's not how sports work. Sports are little intermittent bouts of all-out effort followed by active recovery phases. At no point in time are you ever going to have to be using your forearms for upwards of 45 to 60 seconds at a time. Mind you, and maybe you're a rock climber, right? Maybe you climb mountains. Okay, that is a totally different game. I don't think that we have anybody who does that listening to this. Maybe American Ninja Warrior people would also need to work on their forearm strength endurance a little bit. But outside of that, I really don't see the benefit of it. To sit there and be training with compound movements, heavy compound movements. So we're talking about the deadlift, right? That is probably going to test your grip strength more than anything else that you do, especially if we're not using straps, right? And we're just having to hold on to it with our hands. All the pulling we do, so any horizontal rows or any vertical pulling, right? Like pull-ups, that's all testing your grip. And believe it or not, when you bench and when you do bottom-loaded lunges, that's all forearm, right? So adding this extra time at the end of a lift dedicated to specifically forearms after we've gone through a session where we've deadlifted and then we had like RDLs and we had bottom loaded lunge variations, or we're doing an upper body day, right? And we're benching and then we're barbell bent over rows, single arm dumbbell rows, pull-ups, right? What benefit does adding another 15 to 20 minutes worth of strictly forearm training, what is that going to give you outside of like wasting your time, decreasing your ability to recover? And again, I'll go back to the wasting time because you could be doing some other things. Maybe we're dragging a sled, or maybe we're pushing a sled, or maybe we're doing some mobility work, or we're recovering, or some band distracted, mobility / stretching type work to put us in a better position for tomorrow. So, more is not always better. Forearm training is not necessary for the vast majority of athletes who are training and are doing any pulling or any bottom loaded movements. It's just a waste of your time. Think of if you were a pitcher in baseball, right? And you threw a bullpen and you had, let's say it was like a longer bullpen, you threw 50 pitches and then you went home and you're like, I'm going to take this band that has like 2 pounds worth of resistance and I'm going to do 100 internal rotations here, right? You'd probably say that your time is better off spent doing something else. You just spent how long, how much effort throwing 90 to 100 miles an hour, right, in a BP, and now you're just going to take this 2.5 pound band and do some internal rotations. Doing some external rotations would be a little bit different, but it's an exercise in futility. It'd be like if you were who was it? It was Eric Cressy said, like NASCAR drivers don't go hit the go-kart track afterwards to try to nail down, like their tight turns and things like that. You spend all this time on the track. You need to not waste more time doing something that's not necessarily going to benefit and is just going to repeat what you've been doing on a smaller scale. So I will say today is like a very, very quick episode. Obviously, I think we're only like 6 minutes in. Forearm training is just mostly not necessary. You're getting plenty of quote unquote grip strength training through your bottom loaded movements and your horizontal and vertical pulling movements. Even when we bench or when we press, we're still holding on to something, right? So you can make that even harder by squeezing as hard as you can. And there's a lot of benefits to that. One being, I think it was in super training, the old Eastern Bloc countries found that it actually gave a little bit of a fight or flight response to squeeze something as hard as you can. So that could, in essence, help you hold on to more weight, which would increase the tension, which increases the damage, which allows you to grow faster and more. So if you are going to train your grip, right? If we're going to do some forearm training, what my advice to you is to work it into the rest of the training. Bottom loaded lunge variations, obviously RDLs. The deadlift is a very big one, especially at hex bar. We've got the the Elite FTS combat like rackable deadlift, hex bar deadlift bars, and the grip is actually thicker. It's been great for us because it's gonna kind of limit the amount of weight that most of the kids can pull. So we're never going to get to the point of really being overtrained. But one thing I will say as a caveat here, once your grip goes, everything else kind of goes. So try not to use these movements as like just grip training. Just have it be part of what you're doing. Don't aim to increase your grip strength while trying to do like an RDL or a deadlift, because the second you start finger tipping, it's going to be the second that your body just completely loses any and all positioning. So back to what I was saying, bottom loaded movements, like a ton of pulling. I remember I was at this place called the Performance Compound, and it's probably 8 years ago now. We were doing combine prep, and I was in charge of like all the programming, and the director of the facility, for some reason, when we got done with an upper body day, like very early on, where we had a very high volume block for like the first 2 weeks, you're talking with finishers like 300, 400, 500 total reps. A lot of them are body weight and very light, but a ton of volume to kind of beat them back into like having good work capacity and moving the needle as quickly as we can so they can start handling some heavier loads. The director of that facility decided that they were going to do, after probably 300 pulling reps, that they needed to also do forearms where they're essentially like playing controlled tug of war, or they're hand over hand pulling a sled, which is actually not a terrible exercise, but then doing plate flips and doing the little forearm roll-ups, things like that. And those are just completely and totally a waste of your time. So if you are going to quote unquote train your forearms, build it into your movements. Do more and heavier horizontal pulling. Do more and heavier vertical pulling. Do more and heavier deadlifting. Throw in some farmer's walks, right? Because holding on to something while your body is moving is a lot more, like there's a lot more carryover to sport than there would be for you rolling up a little PVC pipe with 5 pounds on the end of it. So that's it for today. Again, I'll say it again for the probably 15th time in the last 9 minutes. Forearm training is totally unnecessary. It's a waste of your time. It's going to put you behind the 8 ball ball as far as like your recovery goes. And again, it's just an absolute waste of time. If I can get done in 45 minutes, better work, why take an hour and 15 to do that same work? So we'll see you next time. Hope everybody has a good rest of your week.
It's all in my head, now stuck in the void.